committing our entire civilization to taxing the molecule that is the basis of all life in order to mitigate 6 inches to 4.5 feet over the course of a century is ridiculous. Hello everybody, I'm Mango Thunderslice, and today we're talking about climate change and global warming, whatever they want to call it these days. Greta Thunberg has been named the Time Magazine Person of the Year for 2019, right? Joining such illustrious figures as Adolf Hitler, right? And Barack Obama, right? And, you know, it's par for the course, just like the Nobel Prizes, right? The Time Magazine Person of the Year is just completely meaningless, right? Here's NPR reporting on it. We're going to be going through just a few things here. I'm going to be showing that essentially flat Earth is the basis of climate change science. And this was brought forth to me by a person named Joseph Postma, who's a master in science of astrophysics. And it's taken me a while to actually make this video. I do apologize to you, Joe, for taking this long. And if you'd like to have a discussion on a video, just let me know. But in any case, I'm just going to be bringing forth the main claim that he's made essentially about the climate science. It's not even a claim, it's just pointing out a fact about the math behind all of this, prognostication about where the climate is going. And it's literally based on flat earth science. So, and that might sound ridiculous, but I'm going to show you exactly how it's true using his book, which is on Amazon. So yeah, Greta Thunberg is Time Magazine Person of the Year. Right, she quickly became a leading voice on climate change. She's at 16, she's the youngest person to earn the title in the magazine's 92-year history. Right, she burst onto the stage like all these other organic events that the media concocts. Right, totally organic. Right, and she's saying that we need more outrage and we need more optimism. It's like, no, I think we need more sound science, right? We need less teenagers just going around and screaming at the world and pretending like they know what they're talking about, right? It's pretty sad because, you know, I'm tempted to just say that Greta Thunberg is a moron and she shouldn't be chiding the world on things she knows literally nothing about. But, you know, she's a victim of this. She is being taken advantage by deranged commies that are much older than she is, right? I feel bad for her at a certain point because literally her childhood has been ruined by all these insane communists who actually think that the climate is about to blow up and the earth is suffering and we need to save the planet. It's just nonsense. I mean, it's, again, I'm a druid, right? I very much am in tune with the energy of the earth, but climate change is absolute pseudoscience. It's a total joke. This isn't about, oh yeah, we need to drill more oil and belch more chemicals into the atmosphere. Yeah, I'm all down for clean energy. I'm probably more down for clean energy than most of the liberals who are advocating the government pay for it, right? I just see the actual technology and the science, and I like to see the market bring forward these things because that's the only place where it actually makes sense and isn't a giant waste of money, like Solyndra. You know, that was Obama's subsidy into a solar company who went totally belly up before, you know, pocketing a bunch of pump and dump change for his cronies. Right, and that's how it works. All the carbon tax and all the solutions they're putting forth is just more cronyism, right? There's a reason that the banks, the major investment banks, right, Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan are sponsoring climate events. Do you really think that this is something that isn't good for them? Come on. So yeah, basically, Thunberg, you know, just a symptom of a disease, a mental disease that society has, right? It's not the cause of it herself. Trump responded and said, take a chill pill, Greta. just a kid with anger management issues. And of course, everybody in the mainstream media freaked out. This is what they do. They peddle children out to ramble on for them because they don't know what they're talking about. And children, you know, pull at the emotional heartstrings. And then when people respond to the child's nonsense that is being spewed, then people say, oh my God, I can't believe they'd attack a child. Oh my God, they're so evil. It's just stupid. I mean, why would you roll out children if you actually, you know, are having a scientific argument, right? Why would this be your point person? It's, you know, because the science is bullshit. It's complete bullshit. All these scientists who say that they agree on it, they're agreeing on a fundamentally absurd model, which we'll get into in just a second, right? So yeah, basically, and then basically this is supposedly her epic response. She changed her blurb on her Twitter to a teenager working on her anger management problem. Well, hopefully hopefully one day it won't be tongue in cheek and she'll actually work on her anger management problem and stop being used by deranged commies for their own ulterior purposes, right? And it's just absolutely beyond the pale at this point. It's so hard to actually even engage in any part of this culture because it's so rampant and rabid. You can't go anywhere without hearing this climate nonsense, right? And it's just people are blocking traffic, right? You can't even go to work sometimes in the cities because these crazy commies will be blocking the streets. And everything they're getting mad about is absolute nonsense, right? We have family that just went on a vacation to a beautiful country in Central America, and they basically couldn't even enjoy it because they were too upset about how the rise of the sea level is going to, I don't know, eliminate 6 inches of the beach and the coastline over the next century. Right? It's so insane that people can't even live their normal lives because they're being driven by this cult mentality. It's absolutely taken over their brain like a mental virus. Right, and anybody who mocks them, basically they just go like apoplectic. They just shut down. Right, it is absolutely a religion. It is the worst religion of them all. It is the most destructive and most fallacious of all the religions. Is this climate change religion? And it only ends when people basically they stop taking it seriously and just point and laugh like the rest of it, right? Because the sea level is not rising, the temperature of the earth is not warming, the climate is not changing in any unnatural way. It is changing, right? And that's why they changed it from global warming to climate change, because they couldn't prove the warming. There is no warming over the course of the 21st century. Actually, since the late 90s, there's been no warming trend. And the sea level let's get into the sea level, right? So this is NASA. Global climate change, vital signs of the planet. And so here's basically the sea level rise from about the 1990 to the present. It's a straight linear graph essentially. And yeah, basically, let's see. This is their graph from 1880 to the present. It's pretty much a linear graph, maybe a very, very slight parabolic aspect to it, but it's a linear graph. There's nothing there that basically is super threatening and makes me want to just go out and start blocking traffic. Seems pretty natural to me. And again, we're talking about millimeters per year. We are talking about literally millimeters per year, even in their worst case doomsday model. And it's so insane that they want to push this data, and this is supposed to be what we're freaking out about. Let's go back further, right? So this is a set of slides. Ralph Tyner, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, changing sea levels during the past 25,000 years. An introduction to changes due to glaciation and current conditions. And so basically he's going back thousands of years, and they're using the ice core data, post-glacial sea level rise, right? This was all natural, all this sea level rise. This is, this was when the sea level was 120 meters below where it was. And this is all part of the natural glaciation cycle, right? None of this had anything to do with human activity. And here's basically the last 2,000 years. And that's essentially right there, that flat, shelf right there. That's our sea level rise over the last 2,000 years. So in the context of where this planet has been, it's absolutely nothing compared to the meltwater that we've seen due to previous major climatic shifts. What we're experiencing now is absolute peanuts. It is completely non-threatening whatsoever. But again, it's not about science. It's about the emotionality. It's about getting people worked up for socialism, and basically just getting them excited in a mass public spectacle so they'll support the problem reaction solution, as they always do, right? Globally, here's our concluding remarks. It's like, no matter how much they look at the raw data that shows the sea level is not increasing exponentially, it's increasing at the same rate it always has been at least for the last 2,000 years at least. Globally, a rise between 0.6 to 4.3 feet is predicted by 2100. First of all, that's a very wide delta right there. That shows that their science is not even remotely close to, in agreement as much as they say that it is. And, right, 6 inches over the course of 100 years, or 4.3 feet. And again, who lives that close to the water, right? Yes, millions of people live near the water, but who lives on the water? Property developers, hotels, casinos, right? The large sums of money. Do you think that basically over the course of 100 years, let's say it's 4.3 feet, let's say it's basically the absolute worst case scenario. Do you really think the millionaire property developers couldn't make a bulwark to higher than 4.3 feet? Is that beyond the engineering capacity of humans over the course of a century? I really don't think so. And again, committing our entire civilization to taxing the molecule that is the basis of all life in order to mitigate 6 inches to 4.5 feet over the course of a century is ridiculous. Right? Even assuming their worst case scenario, it's ridiculous. And this is why basically, as much as they've tried, after all the propaganda, after all the fear porn, all they've managed to do is addle the brains further of the liberal communists, and what the rest of the country is basically more and more is just pointing and laughing because they don't see the climate changing in the ways that they're saying. If anything, it's getting colder, it's getting wetter, the precipitation patterns are changing. This is part of solar dynamics. This is the grand solar minimum that we're going into. The sun is at its quietest point essentially since the Maunder minimum a couple hundred years ago, and during that time that's when we saw basically a mini ice age. But all of that they've just erased from the data because they're such rigorous, valid scientists, right? They're not propagandists and cult members. No. Right? And so, yeah, people just, they're not even believing it. So now let's get to the real stuff. Okay, so this is The Layman's Guide to the Greatest Scientific Fraud in History by Joseph E. Postma, Master of Science in Astrophysics. This is on Amazon. You can download it. I can't remember. It's like a couple bucks. He's got the longer version of this book, which I will read. It's just, with life as it is, I can only read in little bursts. But I'm glad that he made this because it's very short and to the point and makes very clear the essential claim that he's making, which is, backed up in their own math, that they're using a flat Earth model to their science, right? So he mentions that he wrote the longer book, and this is the shorter one. All right, what is the biggest deal in public science consumption via the media and education system these days? What is everyone supposed to be all worked up about? Climate change, of course, also known as global warming. Global warming, climate change, is claimed to be a problem which the entire world industry must be restructured upon, essentially as a global plan to fight the climate and to fight possible weather that we don't want happening. We've got to fight weather. We have all heard of climate change that is due to human activity and that we must all do something about it, always involving increasing taxes and controlling your life in some way or another that you otherwise wouldn't accept. At the base of all the alarm about the climate is a single generating theory, a fundamental root upon which all research and ideas about the climate is grounded, and that root is called the greenhouse effect. Whenever you hear anything about the climate changing, you also hear about the greenhouse effect, which is the root cause of it changing due to human activity. The alarming climate change narrative grows entirely from its root in greenhouse effect theory. Here's the thing. The greenhouse effect of political climate alarm science has nothing to do with a real greenhouse, that is, with a real greenhouse that we grow plants in. That is kind of problematic on the face of it, isn't it? To name something that isn't actually the thing? Usually we would just call that confusing. Why name something after a thing if it isn't actually the thing? It's not helpful. Not helpful for truth, that is, but it is helpful for doing something else. So where does this climate-changing greenhouse effect come from? Chapter title, Even Children Know This Is Wrong. So are you ready to know the greatest scientific fraud of all time? A fraud which is the basis of climate alarm and its greenhouse effect, and the plan to tax the existence of the molecule responsible for all life, carbon dioxide? That's a funny thing, isn't it? To tax the molecule from which all life is created? The greatest scientific fraud in history is this: spreading incoming sunshine over the entire surface area of the Earth at once as if the Earth is flat. Reread that a few times if you want to. Let it sink in, and think about it yourself for a few moments for a while. For example, think of a situation where in real life, someone came up to you and told you that sunshine falls over the entire Earth's surface at once, that there is no day and night, and that this is because the Earth is flat. That's funny because that's happened plenty of times on the internet. Come on now, what would you think of that, and how would you respond? Think of what you know about the history of science and the erroneous things people have believed in the past, and what we have come to know in modern times about the planet Earth, about the stars and the sun. Well, would you ignore that person saying the things above, and would you call them an idiot? Well, you would ignore that person saying the things above, and you would call them an idiot, would you not? Now imagine that the person telling you the things from the last paragraph is a top scientist, and almost all top scientists are saying the same thing to you. How will you then respond? What will you then believe? Your first reaction in the last paragraph is still the correct one, of course. Is such a thing actually occurring in modern science? Why, yes, here it is. Here is a diagram of it from Harvard University. And so he provides the diagram essentially showing the atmospheric layer and the surface of the Earth represented as flat planes, as bars on this graph, and there's math associated with the different incoming solar radiation and outgoing terrestrial radiation, but essentially they represent the atmosphere and the surface of the Earth as flat lines. And this is here's another one. This is from a video. Let me see. So Pennsylvania State University, sorry. This is same thing from Pennsylvania State University, a one-layer atmosphere and a flat Earth. And this is from a video lecture at the Department of Geophysical Sciences at the University of Chicago, where a professor has just drawn flat lines representing the entire Earth on the chalkboard. Right, and there it is. And then from Columbia University, simple model of the greenhouse effect. Same thing, flat atmosphere, flat Earth. And here's the same thing in a peer-reviewed scientific journal publication in the Bulletin of the American Meteorological Society. And so, yeah, they've basically got a curved Earth, but it's basically representing the same mathematical model as the other ones. And Postma continues, enough with the references. What is happening in those diagrams is that on paper, in their math, in their thinking, and in their model, they are spreading and stretching sunshine over the entire surface of the Earth at once, as if the Earth is a flat plane. There are literally flat lines drawn for the Earth's surface. In the last figure, they have at least drawn a curve to the Earth's surface, but more importantly, they still use the same numbers from the idea of spreading sunshine over the entire Earth's surface as if the Earth is flat, as from other diagrams. You get the point, but let it now be established that indeed this is being done in modern science at our top institutions. They're spreading incoming sunshine over the entire surface area of the Earth at once as if the Earth is flat. And it is this thinking, and it is this starting point, this model of the Earth and sunshine, from where they then postulate the existence of an atmospheric greenhouse effect, and that the climate is changing in an alarming way due to human existence, and that this is supposed to be a bad thing. What do you think? Could a child in kindergarten understand what is wrong with this starting point? And just to confirm that point, I clicked through to the links, right? Just to confirm, though, those are not misrepresentations. Those are absolutely. So this is the first link, and this is basically the PDF article that it links through to. Earth's annual global mean energy budget, and yeah, basically they have the Earth as a flat plane, and they're basically showing the different values for energy coming in and being radiated back out. Let's see, here's the climate system. This is from Columbia. So it's interesting here because they have this first diagram which shows a round Earth and the incoming solar flux and a flat plane. But then basically after that, and here's a quote from underneath it, over a period of one planetary rotation around its axis, the entire surface of the planet is exposed to the incoming radiation and warms up to an absolute temperature T. Averaged over the length of a full number of rotation period, the entire planet's surface emits energy, right? So they're admitting what they're doing, essentially, that they're assuming the Earth is flat, and they're averaging the energy input over the course of a full rotation, right? And just assuming that, that works out to the same. And here, that's when they go down, and that's how they get their flat model, is by taking their round model and assuming that, like a total rotation of the Earth, and basically just assuming that they can just use that average over a flat plane, and that it means the same thing as far as the model. And this is Penn State. The one-layer energy balance model, same thing. This is the image that Postma showed in his book. And they basically they explain that they're averaging it all out, but they don't seem to take notice that that isn't an effective representation of reality. It just seems to be just glossed over. And this is from Harvard. Here we go, the simple greenhouse model with the single layer. All right, so just to confirm what Postma was saying about the models, that's not a misrepresentation. That is literally how they're putting it out there. Error propagation, going back to his book, error propagation. In physics, and especially in modeling and in measurement, we have this term propagation of error. It means simply that if you are making a prediction based on some measurements which you have taken, that the accuracy of your measurements will affect the accuracy of the prediction which is based on those measurements. It follows that the accuracy of the prediction can never be greater than the accuracy of the measurements which were taken to make that prediction. This is all entirely logical, of course. What else would you expect? If your wristwatch was only accurate to 5 minutes, for example, you know the time is somewhere in between 12:30 and 12:35. But then you tell someone that you'll meet them in exactly 30 minutes. Then the actual time you meet them will only be between 1 o'clock and 1:05. You cannot give the person any more accuracy of exactly when you can meet because you don't have good accuracy of where you are now. You can tell them 30 minutes from now, but you cannot say exactly when on the clock face that will be. Error propagation also applies in logic and in philosophy. If you start with a bad idea, it leads to other bad ideas. Ain't that life? If you start with a false representation of reality, then you will develop understandings of this representation which are likewise false in relation to reality. Do you see where this applies? Of course, it applies to the greatest scientific fraud of all time. That fraud of spreading incoming sunshine over the entire surface of the Earth at once as if the Earth was flat could be considered a quintessential example of a false representation of reality. The only thing more false would be what? Thinking that the Earth and sunlight do not exist at all? It is difficult to imagine something which is a falser representation of reality, of the Earth and of the sunlight falling on it, than spreading incoming sunshine over the entire surface of the Earth at once as if the Earth is flat and done in modern science by climate theorists. And from there, it eventually ends with the proposition to tax the molecule at the basis of all life, carbon dioxide. Fascinating. And so false representation. Now, to be specific, what follows from that false representation of reality is the postulate that the sun and sunshine cannot heat anything on the surface of the Earth to any temperature higher than minus 18 degrees Celsius or 0 Fahrenheit. When you spread sunshine over the entire Earth's surface, in your model that is, on paper and in your math, you dilute the power of sunshine because you're stretching sunshine out to an area it doesn't actually fall upon, the night side of the Earth. Sunshine isn't actually stretched out like that despite putting that down on paper. And so the result of doing that on paper and believing in it is that you then believe that the sun only provides a freezing cold, negative 18 degrees Celsius, 0 degrees Fahrenheit worth of heating to the planet. In which case the job becomes figuring out how and why it can ever be any warmer than that anywhere on Earth. Yes, I know, that sounds like a very silly job to give oneself and a very silly thing for someone to think that they need to figure out. Well, you've seen the diagrams. That really is indeed where they're starting. That really is what scientists in modern academia think that they need to do because they've modeled sunshine at negative 18 degrees Celsius as being basically almost irrelevant to creating the climate. What was created to make up for the missing heat required to create the climate was their greenhouse effect. Basically, it works like this. Since the sun isn't strong enough to heat anything above and create a climate above negative 18 degrees Celsius, then the climate must create itself by recycling heat. That was their answer, and they called this recycling of heat a greenhouse effect, even though such a recycling doesn't occur in an actual real greenhouse, and it isn't why a real greenhouse gets warm inside. A real greenhouse gets warm inside because sunshine is strong and can heat things up to quite hot temperatures, as we have all experienced. A real greenhouse with its glass lets the sunshine in to warm things up, but then the glass walls and ceiling trap the warmed air inside, whereas outside the air, which is warmed by contact with the surface, gets blown away by wind, and it also rises up and away with convection, i.e. warm air rises. A real greenhouse does not recycle heat. It just allows the air inside to be warmed up by the sun without that warm air then blowing away and rising away. Outside of the greenhouse, air warmed by contact with the sunlight-heated surface will rise away, and given that it is warm air which rises away, then by definition it can only be replaced by cooler air. Hence, outside the greenhouse, the air stays cooler than inside the greenhouse. Do any of you know if you can recycle heat? Does heat return to the campfire? Can heat return to your home? Can heat go back inside and the steam engine? Of course, the answer is no. We cannot recycle heat. And we actually have that written down in the laws of thermodynamics, if any of these scientists would take the time to remember that. I guess the excitement of taxing the molecule at the basis of all life was just too alluring and too distracting for due diligence. Recall those flat earth diagrams of modern physics from the previous chapter. All of those arrows in them are supposed to be heat recycling itself. And the one diagram from the meteorology journal writes that the heat recycles itself a whole 2 times over. Imagine if you could get your furnace to heat your house 2 more times over than it does by recycling the heat it puts out. This recycling of heat idea that they created then needed to be caused by something, and they figured that carbon dioxide and so-called greenhouse gases could do it. Carbon dioxide is indeed an interesting molecule in the way that it can interact with infrared energy, but the problem was that when they invented the idea that this interaction was the same thing as recycling heat. I work in astrophysics and I studied physics and astronomy to the master's degree level, and I know all about how and why atoms and molecules can interact with light like carbon dioxide does. It's not about recycling heat. Sure, it is all about how these atoms and molecules interact with electromagnetic energy, but the interaction is not about that electromagnetic energy recycling as heat. Everyone I work with knows this if you ask them, but they seem reluctant to recall it and apply that knowledge when it comes to climate alarmism and taxing the molecule at the basis of all life. And so here is essentially a new diagram that Joe Postma has put together showing a more realistic representation of the, and I'll just bring up the image here, a more realistic representation of the sun's effect on the Earth system. And of course, you'll notice that this is not a flat plane Earth, it is a round Earth, and we have the sun being shown on half of the Earth with some calculus equations to calculate the solar infrared radiation flux, of where the basically at noontide, where the sun is directly shining on the Earth, and then basically, where it's shining less on the rest of the planet. And essentially, this works out on when you just shine the sun on half the planet, as is the case in reality, of 30 degrees Celsius, which I believe is 86 degrees or 87 degrees Fahrenheit, right? Which is very much closer to what we feel, at noon on a hot day when the sun is actually shining on us, not the 0 degrees, right? So by averaging out the heat over the course of the entire rotation, they essentially just represent the sun as a constant. And so there's no day, there's no night, there's no heating or cooling, it's just this constant input, right? But think about that. What would the climate be if we didn't have a day or night? The entire climate is based off of the movement of air and water based on changes in temperature, right? So if you didn't have this up and down of the temperature input, then you would not have a climate. They have completely bastardized the mathematical representation of the sun's influence on the climate, and as a result, they don't understand the sun's input on the climate, right? Because they've averaged it, right? It's like, again, if you average the temperature of day or night and said, oh, this is the temperature average over the cycle, so we'll just extrapolate, let's say that's, 20 degrees Fahrenheit, maybe it's winter time. I will set it higher, 50 degrees, and it's winter time. And basically, we just assume that 50 degrees is the constant temperature, right? You would not be representing reality. You would be representing a hypothetical alternate reality where day and night did not exist. But of course, if day and night did not exist, then the climate would not exist either. So as far as I can tell, Mr. Postma is alluding to a very, very critical error that they have made. And, again, when they show you, the sun's influence on the climate, they show you basically a flat line. They represent it as a constant. And so then they say, why is the climate changing? Well, look at the carbon dioxide, it's going up. And they use this basic, this basic bitch, elementary school science and math to bamboozle people. But in reality, they're just committing the almost insanely huge error, right on its face, of representing the Earth as flat and averaging the temperature input of the sun over the entire rotation cycle, and then basically extrapolating that as a flat plane. It's ridiculous, and this is the basis of their entire theory. And again, I don't care how many scientists will agree with that. If it's bullshit, it's bullshit. And I don't need to be a climatologist to see that that's bullshit. I don't need to do any extra schooling, or even the schooling that I have done did not teach me that day and night do in fact exist, and the temperature does get hotter and colder over the course of a 24-hour period. So yeah, that is basically Postma's, and he can show that basically when you average the entire spherical system output, you get that negative 18 degrees Celsius. So, and they're just literally averaging the entire planet and pretending like that's a valid mathematical model and scientific representation of the climate. It's absolute nonsense. So, going back to the book, this diagram shows how in real time that the day side of the Earth receives sunlight and solar heat with an intensity strong enough to create the temperatures we actually experience in the daytime and in real greenhouses to create the climate. I am sure that most everyone is familiar with the sensation of solar heat sunshine on a clear day, and is likewise familiar with the old tale about being able to cook an egg on the sidewalk. Sunshine isn't negative 18 degrees Celsius now, is it? The diagram captures and shows with real science that those hot temperatures are due to sunshine. Well, apparently this is something that needs to be shown to today's academics, confused as they've been by this political climate flat earth physics. But the point here connects back to the originating error of spreading sunshine over the entire Earth's surface at once. Doing that on paper and in math is logically equivalent to reversing the output heat of the Earth and exchanging this for the solar heat input. Do you see on the right-hand side of my diagram where it shows the heat output of the Earth? It's negative 18 degrees Celsius when you work it out. And lo and behold, that's what they're using as the solar heat input in their climate model. And so by spreading solar heat over the entire surface of the Earth at once as if the Earth is flat, what they have in fact done on paper is their mathematics is to reverse the heat's output and use that as the solar heat input. Do you think that might cause a problem? It is error propagation. Once you start with an error, start something with an error, that error then follows along and creates errors in everything else that comes afterwards. Bad ideas only lead to more bad ideas. The solution is, of course, to use and model the real solar input as it comes in real time, as I've done in that diagram above. So yeah, basically, I don't want to read the entire book. I want you, have an incentive to go and get the Kindle book or physical book for yourself. I think that Mr. Joe Postma has done some really good work here. The climate of Earth is solar heat transferring through Earth's atmosphere. That's what Earth's climate is. Read it again. The climate, the weather, is the effect of solar heat shining upon the Earth. And this is happening on a second-by-second basis. What else could it be? Well, academic climate physics thinks that the climate is the climate creating itself by recycling heat a couple times because they ignored the sun. Who do you think has got it wrong? He says he submitted a scientific paper about all this to a physics journal stating the scientific concerns. We'd like to know what the response was. Astonishingly, they rejected the paper because they said that I couldn't prove any of this makes a difference, tacitly implying that they could find nothing wrong with flat Earth theory and spreading sunshine over the entire Earth at once in our scientific thinking. Flat Earth theory is thus accepted by the scientific peer review system, and flat Earth theory is thus part and parcel of modern science. Here's an idea that most people can understand. Not all math is true. That is, in the sense that all math has to do with reality. You may be able to write down some math on paper and have an equation which balances with regard to itself, but this equation may not have anything to do with reality. Climate alarm physics uses mathematics where sunshine is spread over the entire surface of the Earth at once, which dilutes the heating power of sunshine down to a maximum of negative 18 degrees Celsius, gets rid of the day and night cycle, and uses a mathematical scheme where the climate recycles heat 2 times over in order to create itself, since the sun can't do it. This is flat Earth theory in modern physics, and there is simply nothing else imaginable that is this great of a blunder for where it occurred. It is difficult to even come up with analogies to describe in other terms the scale of this fraud. Nothing matches it. It is a definition of absurdity unto itself, unmatched by anything else we know or that we've done in the past. This will set the reference for defining and analogizing to absurdity in the future. In the future, people will say, I may be stupid, but I'm not as stupid as university academics. Or, what you're doing is as ridiculous as university academics believing in flat Earth theory. It is actually all quite disturbing to me, and it should be disturbing to you too if you think about it. The people who we employ with our taxes to be our smartest representatives and to teach our children believe in flat Earth theory and call it climate alarm. Now, to corroborate what we were just talking about, essentially we can go to the NASA Global Climate Change website and we scroll down here and they're talking about water vapor, carbon dioxide, methane. But here they have their solar radiance chart and they're essentially showing that, and again, they always cherry pick their timescales, right? But here's 1880 to the present, and they're basically showing the variability of total solar irradiance, which is the entire light and recorded electromagnetic emissions from the sun. It is not all inclusive of all of the emissions from the sun as far as particle emissions, and there's multiple different mechanisms of climate forcing that we are seeing, that we've discovered in the last few decades. And thanks to groups like Suspicious Observers, we basically, there's, 500,000 people all over the world who are daily watching the space indices, right? The space weather, the solar weather. And it's when you really observe these, you can predict not just climate patterns, but also earthquakes and whatnot. They have quakewatch.net, which is essentially observing patterns in the emissions of long-wave radiation from inside of the Earth. And this is basically, they've developed a pretty good working model of earthquake prediction based on this. And this is absolute frontier science that the mainstream will never tell you about, because if they were, they would have to acknowledge the fraudulent and fallacious underpinnings of their climate scam, right? The new frontier of science is absolutely 100% tied to the demise of the climate change scam and the cult religion. Right. But, again, back to NASA, we see, in their model, they're saying, basically the temperature is just running away to the positive, and total solar radiance has not been running away to the positive. It was very active. And again, this chart doesn't show that here in the late 20th century, this spike right here is the greatest spike in 11,000 years, right? They don't show that. And that coincided with a rise in temperature. This temperature is also completely manipulated by fraudulent data, right? Putting the sensors next to unnatural sources of heat emission, right? Man-made sources, and now they're actually just using computer-generated data. So they're 71% of their results now is literally just from the model. They're just cherry-picking numbers out of their ass, out of this computer program that they've developed. And again, that computer program is based on a flat Earth. Right, at its very raw calculation of the sun's input into the Earth, right? And they acknowledge it's reasonable to assume that changes in the sun's energy output would cause the climate to change, since the sun is the fundamental source of energy that drives our climate system. Indeed, studies showed that solar variability has played a role in past climate change. For example, a decrease in solar activity coupled with an increase in volcanic activity is thought to have helped trigger the Little Ice Age between approximately 1650 and 1850, when Greenland cooled from 1410 to the 1720s and glaciers advanced in the Alps. And then they say, but several lines of evidence show that current global warming cannot be explained by changes in energy from the sun. Right? Again, these are the same people who are using flat Earth math. Right, they say that since 1750, the average amount of energy coming from the sun has either remained constant or increased slightly. Right? First of all, that's a very poor summary of the data, right? Does this look like it's remaining constant to you? Does that look like a constant? Doesn't to me. And again, this is not even all inclusive of the sun's total spectral emissions and energetic emissions. And then they continue, if the warming were caused by a more active sun, then scientists would expect to see warmer temperatures in all layers of the atmosphere. Instead, they have observed a cooling in the upper atmosphere and a warming at the surface and in the lower parts of the atmosphere. That's because greenhouse gases are trapping heat in the lower atmosphere. Again, these people are basing their solar math on a flat Earth, so you can take everything they say with a grain of salt. Right, and here they conclude with a third point: climate models that include solar radiance changes can't reproduce the observed temperature trend over the past century or more without including a rise in greenhouse gases. And that's not true, because again, they're not including all of the indices from the sun, right? So if your model is incomplete on the solar side, then by default, you have to extrapolate that the changes observed are due to man-made causes. All right, so if the model's incomplete, you cannot come to these conclusions. So yeah, Space Weather News is another good website with the daily space weather updates. And is there a global warming pause.com, just if you want a quick reference to show your family who still believe that the sea level is rising catastrophically fast and that the warming is just out of control. Just type in is there a global warming pause.com. It aggregates the data sets, 17 data sets of the climate and the temperature, global mean temperature, and 12 out of 17 resolutely show no warming trend overall over the last 30 years, right? And here you can see the different data sets. And so let's see, most of these at the top basically show no warming over the past 25 years. A lot of them in the 20s to high teens, and basically the rest of them, there's still no warming trend. It's just less than 10 years, right? So, you know, and again, this is the NOAA data, right? Berkeley, NOAA, right? So and this is obviously subject to the cherry-picked data that's been pointed out by myself and many others, right? And of course, you know, I've been pointing this out for a long time. Let's see, this was from December 19th, 2014, right? I got kicked off of Facebook in 2014 because I think they knew that I was just about to go on a warpath with destroying the illusions, right? Let's see, the sun causes climate change. This was 2016. Why Trump is right on climate change. This was after he pulled us out of the Paris Agreement. You know, again, a document that the climate-teers said was totally feckless and inadequate, and then as soon as Trump pulled us out of it, it's, oh my god, the world is ending. It's like, wait, was it pointless or was it absolutely vital? Like, you know, again, it's the cult. It's not about reality information to them. It's just their emotion. It's all based on emotion. How to Prove Global Warming is Pseudoscience. This was earlier in 2019. And basically, basically Einstein and the Eddington eclipse, you know, we get into the ether physics aspect in these ones, and, you know, basically show that once you understand the actual etheric nature of the universe and physics, then it becomes very easy to dispel with pseudoscientific notions like climate change and global warming and, you know, the greenhouse effect, which is based on flat earth math. And in closing, we'll go back to the book by Mr. Postma, and I just thought this was a good closing to the whole climate thing, because it's getting really ridiculous. Again, these people are absolutely religious fanatics in their cultish dedication to the climate change you know, hoax, and the media is constantly egging them on, just like the rest of the liberal program. And Joe gets into some really good stuff in this book talking about that, and I encourage you to pick up the book from Amazon. I'll put a link down below to this shorter version, the layman's guide, as well as to the longer version, which I intend to read as soon as I get some time to do so. So I'll close with this from Joe. We have reached levels of absurdity that simply should not be possible to exist. When you realize that you are facing people, scientists at that, who will not have a rational discussion about whether flatline Earth theory can be valid, then you realize you are not in a discussion at all. And if you are not actually in a discussion with people who should be capable of such discussion with you, then what do you realize that you are in fact in? The answer is that you are in a war. You can help fight and win this war by sharing the truths you have learned in this book to everyone you can. Do not allow the other side to silence you. Do not allow them to tell you it is not important. Trust your reason and fight for the ontological, rational truths which you know benefits humanity in its awareness of them. A few snaps for that. And on that note, I'll leave you guys. Hope you enjoyed the video. Comment, share, like, and subscribe if you're not already, and hit the notification bell, because YouTube will not let you know otherwise, right? We've got 65 subscribers over on BitChute, and we're getting more views on the videos over there. That's just to show you what the algorithm is. We've got 2.4 thousand subscribers here, and we can't get more than 100 views except in rare circumstances. But anyway, it's all good to me. It's all for the service to the higher power and my own enjoyment, right? And point and laugh. That's all you can do in the face of the liberal communist program. Have a good one, guys. I'll see you next time. Cheers.